Since 2005, BlueHat has been where the security research community and Microsoft come together as peers.
To debate and discuss, share and challenge, celebrate and learn.
On the BlueHat Podcast, join me, Nick Fillingham.
And me, Wendy Zenone, for conversations with researchers, responders, and industry leaders, both inside and outside of Microsoft.
Working to secure the planet's technology and create a safer world for all.
And now, on with the BlueHat Podcast.
Welcome to the BlueHat Podcast. Dan Tentler, aka Viss. Thank you so much for joining us, Dan.
Thank you for having me.
Dan, could you give us a little introduction? Who are you? What do you do here?
Sure. So my name's Dan Tentler. I'm one of the two founders of Phobos Group. We just turned 7 this February. We are a tiny boutique consulting organization that helps companies do a variety of different types of things on the topic of security, from offensive and defensive related things to architecture, to threat intel, to incident response. We're sort of a full service custom shop. So we do sometimes commodity stuff, sometimes a lot more colorful, interesting stuff. And it usually means I end up full of stories.
Which is in part why you're here on the podcast. Yeah. You presented at BlueHat 2023. Now, folks that are on the Twitters or on the Mastodons, have been around bulletin boards and stuff, may know you as Viss. Would that be fair?
Yeah. There's a lot of Dans in the world. And so I remember one DEF CON, oh man, I don't know how long ago it was, but there were 7 Dans in one photograph that we took just for fun, because there were 7 Dans at one party.
You could have a Dan village.
Yeah, there's a lot of Dans. And so you use a handle and it helps you stand out a little bit more from all the other Dans.
So Viss, is there a quick sort of little history of how Viss, why Viss? Because I couldn't quite range the letters of Dan Tentler or say them in such a way that they became Viss. I'm assuming it's not related to your actual name.
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, it's actually shorthand for a longer handle, which is Vissago, which is a typo from when I was 16 or 15 or something like that.
And that is Vissago?
Yeah, Vissago. It's a typo. The short version of the story is I was 15 or 16 or something like that. I had just gone through, at the time, what a 15-year-old could call a nasty breakup. And I was
the worst in your life so far.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because I'll tell you, life gets a lot more interesting after you turn 15. I was sat in the movie theater. I was watching this old Jeff Goldblum movie called Hideaway. And the premise of the movie is that a demon possesses somebody, and this demon is killing people and making a castle out of their bones. And I was like, there's a role model. And so I basically changed my nick that night on several bulletin boards I was on, but I typoed the name. I thought it was Vissago. It was actually Vassago. And I had no idea at the time. This was I guess some kind of biblical reference or something like that. And it stuck. And so I was Vissago for years and years and years on IRC and bulletin boards. And then people didn't want to type that much. So it was Vissago, and then it got shortened to Vissy, and then it became Viss, and then it's been Viss since I don't remember. But it's really amusing going and finding other people on the internet with the same typo, because every once in a while I'll run into one, and there's a handful. But a really hilarious story is that there was a guy whose handle was Vassago, spelled correctly with an A, who was the author of a script that people used to use in the 90s for MIRC, if you're old enough to remember MIRC. Yeah, remember Merc?
I love Merc. Cut my teeth on Merc.
Right, same. And so there was a guy who wrote a script called Phoenix.irc for Merc. And people can't spell. And so for a decade on IRC, on FNet, and Freenode, I guess, people were asking me when I was going to release the next version of Phoenix.irc. And I had no idea what they were on about, because I'd never heard of this guy and I'd never heard of Phoenix.irc. But at some point, I just started giving people bogus answers. They're like, oh yeah, it'll come out tomorrow. Just keep an eye out. So yeah, it was super bizarre. I have no idea what came of it. And I have no idea if any of this ever made it back to the guy who actually wrote Phoenix.irc. But that was like dumb accidental nick typo squatting in the 90s.
So apart from Merc and misspelt Jeff Goldblum references, what was 15-year-old Dan Tentler doing? Was that the beginning of your sort of career, so to speak? Is that the beginning of the path that you're on right now? Does it start earlier? Does it start later? When do you become the Dan Tentler that we know as the speaker at BlueHat 2023?
So you sound like you're old enough to remember WIV, World War IV, WWIV bulletin boards.
I may be old
remember
enough
WIV?
that I don't know what that is. I'm sorry. I come from a land down under where we only got electricity and paved roads last year, so we're a little behind.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either. I think I'm old enough, but
okay.
Fill us in.
So you guys know, you two know what bulletin boards are, right?
Yes.
BBSs?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so with WWIV, World War IV was just a software that was a bulletin board. And you basically would run this on an MS-DOS, Pentium 2, 486 DX2 66, whatever you had at the time.
With the turbo button that you
yeah, that's right.
It didn't do anything.
And you'd plop a modem into that thing, and that modem would talk to the software, and it would receive phone calls, answer, and then it'd give you your BBS experience. Fun thing about World War IV, or WIV, was that as a lot of other follow-on softwares, Iniquity, Oblivion, Oblivion 2, for any old school ASCII, ANSI artist types in the crowd, all those, I think WIV was the first. And from WIV, there were a bunch of there's a feature set that people came to expect out of BBS software. And one of those feature sets was the ability to upload files and download files. Like what you now know today in corporate America as what I like to call the ocean of file share, where every company has one of these. It's some just junk pile, back office, Samba file share with terabytes of garbage and nonsense in it that everyone has read-write access to, which now today, when you phrase it like that, sounds like an absolute security nightmare. This is a tiny, tiny microcosm of the same. So now you have a bunch of teenagers with access to some computer at the end of a phone line somewhere, wherever is in their local calling area, that allows you to send and receive just arbitrary random files. And one of the things that DOS did differently than Unix systems do today is the order in which paths are kept track of. So like when you look at the path, like the execution path of like when you run, Top or Apache or whatever, like with a Unix system, it looks at the path variable, and the path variable is full of a bunch of paths, and it looks through those paths in that order. Well, with DOS, the directory you're in, the CWD, the current working directory, is the beginning of the path. And so if you try to run anything, it doesn't matter what, it's going to look in the directory you're currently in first for whatever you're trying to run before it looks to the system paths, which ended up being kind of a nightmare for DOS boards because there was a bug that somebody discovered that I used a lot as a kid, which was if you took like command.com, which was your command line interpreter, and you renamed it to pkunzip.exe and you uploaded it to a board, you would have pkunzip.exe go into the uploads directory. And then you would go and preview a zip file, and you would pick any zip there and say, preview the zip file. And it would run your version of pkunzip.exe, the one you just uploaded, and not the system version of pkunzip. So you would instantly get a shell.
Right.
And I was like, oh, that's fun. And so, yeah, 15-year-old me in the 90s, like deleting people's bulletin boards because we got in some snit in high school or what have you. But like, I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but that was pretty amusing. And then like later when BBSs started to get sunset because people started getting their cable modems and people were getting online, and then IRC happened, I got a really fun crash course into like, again, back in the 90s before there was like a NAT device or firewalls in the house. You had to buy extra IP addresses from your cable modem provider to have more than one computer in the house get online. And again, this is one of these like, who in their right mind would do this? Like, this is lunacy. Each workstation would get its own publicly routable IPv4 address directly on the internet, which is what? And yeah, I was talking to printers in other neighborhoods and making them print stuff. And I was, remember PC Anywhere?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Before WebEx, before, maybe not before VNC, but like, it was like the Windows, you want to control Windows from somewhere else, use PC Anywhere. You could like, same thing. This was before people understood that like making something public means it's public. You could just open up PC Anywhere. And at the time, it would look on the local network you were on, like you were attached to other people's broadcast domains, I guess. And like, you could just connect to other people's PC Anywhere machines and do remote control their computers. And this is like 96 or 97, maybe 90, something like that. But yeah, I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I was just screwing around. Cause like you open up PC Anywhere and it like, there's a button. Maybe there wasn't a button, or maybe it did it automatically. I forget, but it would show you like what it could see. And so you'd open PC Anywhere and you're like, hey, look, all my neighbors. Try one.
I love your curiosity. You still have it. I mean, I remember during BlueHat 2023, we were back in February, you and I were standing there and we're at the podium and you're like, oh, see this device. I discovered this thing. If you put your fingers on it, then it brings you to the setting. And through this whole time of the conference, getting to know you, I think you had explained so many things to me, which leads me to your talk. I liked the premise of your talk. I like how it kind of dug into, here are the tools and the tips and the tricks of what the original security folks would do. And this is why you need this now. If you could go into, tell the audience about your talk and what led you to deciding to present on that and your thoughts around it. It's great.
Sure, yeah. So my topic was architecting for security the old ways. And it was essentially a talk that spoke to how people who operate computers and networks can use the stuff that we used back in like 2005 to bolster their security posture in very meaningful ways. Because in a lot of circumstances, the tools that I covered in my talk are just running under the hood of expensive appliances anyway. Like, to give you an example, in 2018, 2017, something like that, I was at 44Con in London, which is another security conference. And there was a German researcher that presented some findings surrounding, I believe it was a FireEye device, where he discovered that you could overwrite one of the parsers. So I think it's the PX device. I could be wrong, but it was the FireEye appliance that was responsible for like being between your locally hosted email server and the internet. And so it would like grab mail off the wire and it would like look at the mail to see if it was bad, and it would like remove viruses and bad attachments and stuff like that, and then send it along the line. And so to do that, it had to have file parsers, and the file parsers would look at the file type attachment that was attached to the email and then decide what to do. But it was all literally just Nginx and Python under the hood. And so what was happening was, since it's a Unix system and everything ran as root, you could send a 7-zip along the wire. And because of the way that you compress 7-zip, you can do what are called absolute paths. So when you decompress that 7-zip, it will just decompress to whatever the specific absolute path was. Well, in this case, the researcher figured out where the parser Python files are located on disk and had his payload overwrite one. And so it overwrote the parser for RTF files. And then he would send a RTF file through, which would then trigger whatever script he overwrote the parser with, which he did Python interpreter, which was a C2 framework, a shell. And so this guy was able to send 2 emails through a FireEye appliance and get a root shell on it. And the reason for that premise is exactly the same as with the World War IV BBS story that I told earlier, which was that you're taking advantage of these low-level like operating system, like this is how the thing is supposed to work. It doesn't even necessarily qualify as a bug per se, but this is like the way that these things are architected. A, they don't know their history, and B, they are unaware of how operating system level stuff works, and they don't build precautions into their tooling to keep track of the fact that, like, if you ask a thing the right way, you can just use its like intentional, it works this way on purpose functionality in an abusive way. And so back in 2005, there was not a security industry, at least not one that I was aware of. And so if you wanted to defend your infrastructure from bad guys, you didn't have a FireEye, you didn't have Palo Alto, you didn't have an industry there, you didn't have a Twitter feed full of 10,000 people happy to give you free advice. Like none of this existed. You had to figure it out for yourself. And the tools and techniques you had available to you were like sysadmin stuff. Like you have control of the network, you have control of the operating system stack, you have control of the file system. What can you do to like keep them out? And like my brain, because I'm a dork, keeps going to like be Bowser. Mario is coming and he's got mushrooms and they're not for you. So like be aware. There's this crazy mushroom guy coming and you run the castle, you own the castle. You got to keep Mario out. So like use your Koopas, use your flame traps, use your bridges, everything at your disposal to make Mario's life as miserable as you possibly can. And what I've noticed is that there are some people that sort of understand that that is the case, and there is other people that don't seem to care. And so, but now, I'm old and crusty, so now I have to tell people literally half my age, hey, there is this thing called fail2ban that's probably older than you that you might want to look into, that we have been using for 25 years, if not more, to stop bad guys from doing bad guy stuff. And instead of having to spend weeks and weeks and weeks writing Yara rules and dealing with firewall ACLs and all this other stuff, or complex cloud dashboards where you can't tell where the controller you're looking for does what, or each region has its own firewall zone you have to keep track of and nothing sends logs to the right place. This thing was invented 20 years ago that basically says, hey, if that IP address fails SSH login 5 times, ban it. That's it. That's the logic. And it works like a champ. And it's been glorious for 25 years, and it continues to work. And then now you can push a button and deploy 1,000 cloud instances to all over the world. Well, if you can do that, and then you just imbibe the logs from all of those fail2ban instances, you now have your own threat intel feed, because now you have your own fleet of sensors that are all detecting. Well, fail2ban comes out of the box with SSH brute force protection, but you can tell it to read any text file, because that's how Linux systems tend to work, because everything is a text file. And so since everything is a text file, you can read and write to practically anything, including device drivers. It's like Legos, but it's software. And it's all, and for the most part, plain English. But yeah, so the whole concept of the talk was this is the stuff that we used to do before there was an industry. And this is how and then to that end, if you were to unwrap a FireEye device, what's under the hood? Nginx, grep, sed, awk, fail2ban, SSH, OpenSSL. It's all the stuff that we were using 20 years ago. They just put a big red wrapper around it and sold it as an appliance. And so if you understand how this stuff works under the hood, it makes you a lot more formidable as a blue teamer, or even as a red teamer, understanding that now this cloud thing is unavoidable, and anybody can spin up 20 new instances at their leisure at the touch of a button. And it makes for very interesting times on both attack and defense topics. Because as an attacker, if you block my infrastructure, great, I can just spin up new infrastructure in another country. Good luck chasing me down. And as a defender, it works the same way. It's I could spin up 500 Tor nodes, and if I could get them plugged in fast enough, then I could potentially detect stuff in Tor coming for me. And so it's still software Legos basically, but it's just gotten horribly bigger. And so the whole premise of the talk was to show people it's actually easier if you think about it in the old ways, because think of it this way, a bug comes out, any bug, pick a bug, pick I don't know, the new ping of death, the new ICMP remote code execution that's affecting Windows. I think it got patched very recently, but it's a couple of weeks old. That bug, well, I guess since it's a Windows bug, it'll have Microsoft will give it a code name, and Microsoft will give it a serial number, basically. You got MS23, it'll be MS23 something, something, something. Oracle will give it one, Apache will give it one, IBM will give it one, Tenable will give it one, MITRE will give it one, CVSS will give it one. That's 7 just off the top of my head. And each one of those is going to have a slightly different impact number, right? And so if you're a defender and one bug comes out, there's 15 of these different taxonomies that exist, and you have to grapple with all of that. Which one is the scary one? Which do I have to care about the most? What if they're two contending where the authors of the bug disagree on the severity? You as the defender are stuck in the middle there, if you subscribe to that type of analysis of bugs. And so you can skip all that and just say does it give the attackers a shell? Yes or no? Will it take my box offline? Yes or no? Do the attackers have to have access to the equipment already to abuse this thing? Yes or no? And so there's a lot of pomp and circumstance that gets added to stuff. But the reality is it's not that difficult if you understand even just a little bit about what actually happens under the hood.
I think we're done here. You've solved all of InfoSec in 11 minutes. Thank you, Dan. No. So staying with this theme. So the title of your talk was Architecting for Security, the Old Ways with Dan Tentler. And I have to say, Dan, as I saw the papers come in and I saw just the title, I didn't get it, wasn't the point yet where I'd read through the abstract. I had this immediate sort of cynical sort of read on that, and it was like old man yells at cloud. I was like, it was Grandpa Simpson, like telling the young people to stop picking the lemons from the lemon tree. I'm merging multiple Simpsons episodes together there. But you had a couple of like key phrases in your slides that really struck me when I saw you present. And I've got a couple of snips here from it. So first was like, all the old ways still work. Like, to me, that was like one of the big takeaways is like, all the old ways still work. And I think I took that to mean, if you are someone that's been in this space for a long time, don't throw away your old knowledge. Don't throw away the techniques and the learning and the skills from 20 years ago, because they're still relevant. But then also to the folks that are new to the industry and coming into the industry, or even, not that new, knowing the history of how security folks did this stuff 10, 15, 20 years ago is very important, and maybe as important as learning all of the sort of the new, latest and greatest techniques as well. So first of all, did I get that right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, you totally did.
Sweet. And then the other one that I thought was really cool, and then I'll shut up too, but the put everything behind a VPN. Like, I don't care what it is. It needs to be behind a VPN.
I don't care.
There's no example where it doesn't need to be behind a VPN. I thought that's
right.
I'm not skilled enough in like network architecture and management to be able to defend that statement, but I just love how emphatic you were about that go-do, like everything behind a VPN, everything behind a VPN.
Yeah. Well, you are. I'll tell you, you are.
Got
it. And for two, the whole fact that you can do remote code execution with ICMP today, right now, means if I can ping it, I can shell it. So if I can ping it over the internet and it's vulnerable to the thing, I get a shell. Do you really want me to have a shell on your equipment because I can ping your equipment?
Yeah.
That should be a t-shirt. That should be a t-shirt. If I can ping it, I can shell it.
Actually, I just found the slide here. And then your follow-up point was, the more I see, the more I can learn about you. Or the more I see, the more I can mess with. So,
and you both have long tenured professional experiences. In these long tenured professional experiences, if I ask the question, is it usually the same people at a company that maintain the equipment on the inside of the network as well as outside of the network that's still owned by the company? It's generally the same department. It may not be the same humans, but it's like usually one department or one, division, depending on the size of the company. And usually those decisions all will roll up to like a very small number of decision makers, like usually one or two people. And so at the end of the day, if you look at the outside of a company and you see big problems, the chances are incredibly high that you're going to see probably worse on the inside of the network than you do on the outside of the network. And so you can learn a lot based on that. People are creatures of habit. They find patterns and they repeat the patterns. And so if you are cool, like quoting myself, if you see a company that's rocking IIS 8.5 on their perimeter, like, there's going to be monsters under that hood.
So that feels like sort of good guidance for a red teamer, right? So like if you're red teaming and you see that as an example, then maybe you can extrapolate to there's going to be more stuff both on the outside and on the inside?
Not maybe.
Not maybe. Got it.
Not maybe. So a really good way to wrap your head around it, if you're not technical, is, when you go camping and you're in the northern half of the U.S. or in like Northern California, or like the top third of the Western seaboard, there are usually signs that talk about like how to deal with the potential of bears being in the vicinity. And they say like, don't leave food out, like make sure it's locked up, sometimes hang it from a tree, because sometimes bears. Well, imagine if you were going into a scenario like that and you weren't the one that was camping and you wanted to make sure that some campers had an incredibly bad time. How could you exploit this situation knowing that there are bears, understanding how bears do, if you really wanted to make life miserable for like, the glamping family over there in the $4 million RV that like they should really have brought a tent? Like, you leave food out. It's really straightforward, right? Well, it's the same way here. If you see people running a network like that, there are certain assumptions you can make. Right now, one of them is if I can ping it, I can shell it. And so if there's IIS 8.5 on the perimeter and I can ping it, I'm getting a shell in an IIS box for a multitude of reasons. And then at that point, there's a lot of very well-known, very bad, no, I shouldn't say bad behavior. It's more like lack of hygiene, lack of maintenance that you can assume is present. And if you can make, like, smoke testing these assumptions is really, really easy. It's literally like, look at what version of something they're running. Is that version 10 years old? Has it not been patched in a decade? If the leadership who has to own that asset is okay with that asset being there, they are probably okay with other things in the same vein of being there. And so if you find something that's 10 years old on the perimeter, you're going to find something that's probably older inside the LAN. And so, like, I'm the one over in the corner, Grandpa Simpson, screaming like old man yells at cloud saying, you're doing it wrong. And nobody likes to be told that their baby is ugly. And so I'm that guy, sadly, that is telling people that their baby is ugly because the baby is actually on fire and they're not paying attention to the baby that's on fire. And it's like, hey, like, maybe bathe the kid once in a while and it won't catch fire.
I think we need a metaphor counter for this episode here, and I think we get the ding every time Dan introduces a new one. Yeah, so I think, this all gets summarized, I think, Dan, by saying the fundamentals are still the fundamentals. The fundamentals are still the most important thing to go learn, get the fundamentals right, and then maybe, think about, putting an AI, deep learning appliance somewhere on your machine, do the cutting edge stuff second, do the fundamentals first. Is that sort of a TLDR?
Yes. And I would also add that all the super fancy high-end stuff relies on a strong foundation of the fundamentals underneath. And if that doesn't exist, then the super fancy space age crazy stuff that you're doing isn't going to work either at all or as well as you had hoped. So also the thing to remember is that in a lot of cases, like, do you know what Bayesian filtering is? Have you ever heard Bayesian filtering?
Like the mathematical thing?
Yes, Bayesian filtering. That's how email spam filters work. Bayesian filtering. And basically the way that it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to dumb it down a lot. But basically, when you feed an email...
Please use at least 3 metaphors.
Okay. When you feed spam to a Bayesian filter, basically what it does is it extracts every word, like every word in that email, including all the like mime headers and all that stuff. And it creates basically like a frequency analysis. It says, here's the different words that appeared in this email, and here's how often they appear. And then it creates 2 piles of them, one for good and one for bad. And so when you classify an email as spam, it looks at all the words in that email and it says, these are the words that are associated with bad, the words and what order they're in is associated with, bad email. And these are the words and what order they're in that's associated with a good email. And so that's how Bayesian filters work, because the more you train the filter, the better clarity it has for what is good and what is bad. And for 15 years now, they have called Bayesian spam filters machine learning or AI. And it's like, it's neither. It's literally just like a frequency analysis chart. And so like up until GPT came very recently, that's what people were passing as AI. No, it's just a Bayesian filter. It's literally your spam filter that's being used for something else and not spam. But like Postfix and SendMail and, Thunderbird have been using this for 20 years, probably more. And so it's really interesting that like there's this practice of like you take all these fundamental tools and you wrap them up in a big cellophane wrapper and you put a label on it. And like under the hood, it's generally speaking the same stuff over and over and over again. They just keep unwrapping it and changing the wrapper. It's like, if I'm buying an orange and you put it in a paper bag or a plastic bag, like it's still the same orange on the inside. It's just the thing on the outside keeps changing.
I think there might have been one metaphor, but sorry, I'll let it slide.
I was trying to count there. You do well with your metaphors. It's like you practice them.
Well, it's a muscle you grow. And so like when you're trying to make a point about a very technical topic, in a lot of cases, the people to whom you're trying to make this point they just want the TLDR. They don't care about the technical details. They have no interest in like OS query now is just a cyborg, like a borged out version of what Tripwire was like 15 years ago. And like, you can still install Tripwire and use it now, but people are using OS query because it's better. And so like, they're like, I don't know what either of these two things are. All I'm hearing is a bunch of clicking sounds. Speak English. And you're like, okay, cool. Who would make a better car thief? And they're like, what? Like, who would make a better car thief? A person that spent 15 years as a master mechanic repairing all sorts of different vehicles, or some kid that watched 3 or 4 YouTube videos about how to break into a car. And they'd be like, well, obviously the master mechanic. Well, right, exactly. So you're proving my point. If you know the ins and outs of like what's under the hood and you know how these things work, you're going to be the first person to be like, that's how you disable the alarm. That's how you disable the GPS tracking. That's how you unlock the steering wheel. Here's how you like, you know, do all these other interesting things. And so like, if you have a mastery of a thing, then that mastery can be used for both attack and defense. If you don't have a mastery of the thing, then the best thing you can hope for is maybe Googling it, fake it till you make it, and then you're the next SolarWinds. And so like, the whole premise of like, I'm one of those people, and this is a very unpopular opinion, that security can't really be a starter career, because to do security, you have to understand the thing that you're securing. And if you've never done technical work and you've never spent time working with the thing that you're trying to secure, how are you supposed to secure it? You don't know how it works. Like, the attackers are going to know how it works better than you do, and then you're outgunned, and that's it. And so like, at the very first Enigma conference, Rob Joyce, the former, he's back in there now, but he was like the head of NSA TAO, I guess, the Tailored Access Operations Group. He's like the guy that was in charge of the division of the NSA that has people go and hack other countries for governmental reasons. He was on stage basically saying, if we know more about your environment than you do, you're going to have a bad time. And that's like the banner statement there is if the attackers know more about your environment than you do, you're going to have a tough time defending that environment. Like, it doesn't really matter what the environment is. If they know more than you do, like if knowledge is power, then you're giving it to them by making it plainly available on your perimeter, or, you know, telegraphing to the attackers that I'm cool running 20-year-old unpatched software that talks to the internet. And so like, all of these things telegraph stuff. And if your security whiskers are tuned correctly, you can pick up on that telegraphing and say, oh God. And at some point, it's literally copy paste after you see, you know, 100, 200 of these things.
I want to jump in here because you are a wealth of knowledge. But what I appreciate that I learned from you at the Blue Hat Conference 2023 was that you have this knowledge and you've been doing this for so long. But what I love is, like, you know, you and I were talking, you explained how like Mastodon worked on the back end, you know, on the, you know, the side we're in the hallway. And I like how you take the time to explain it. And then you don't have that vibe about you where you're like, hey, do you know what this is? And I was like, no. And you're like, okay. So you just back up. And that is so important for the next generation of security folks, to have people that are, you know, not in that mindset like, oh, you don't know what this is. Your knowledge and your willingness to explain and take the time, and obviously everything that you have detailed just in this podcast has been really useful. But I have to touch on something from Blue Hat where you're asking me about, do you know this? No. Let me show you. You pull out this bag in your backpack and I will sanitize. It says spy stuff. And tell me about this spy stuff briefly. I know we're running out of time, but just wanted to touch on that because that was just a gem. That was a gem, seeing this packet of spy stuff. And I know it's just security tooling and whatnot, but what's in there?
It's basically like 3 or 4 security toys, and largely just like USB cables and chargers and stuff. Because if you've ever bought a device, that device had like a in most cases, a USB charging port. And if you have devices that are more than 5 years old or more than 10 years old, they have different USB plugs. And so like, you're going to have a USB micro cable, you're going to have a USB mini cable, you're going to have a USB-C cable. And if you're afflicted by owning an iPhone, then you're going to have all of their different cables as well. And so you have a bundle like this full of cables to just put power in all of these different devices, who all will knife fight in the parking lot before they agree on a standard, which I'd love to watch.
I heard Europe.
So my bag.
Isn't Europe standardizing USB-C now?
Yeah, I think I don't remember who it was, but I think it was some sort of parliamentary court or some sort of government sued Apple and said, you gotta pick a standard. And so like Apple got sued and said, no, you can't keep doing these custom everything plugs. You gotta go with the standard. But yeah, so like there was like a Proxmark in there. There was a Proxmark. There's an RTL SDR.
Flipper.
There was a Flipper Zero and a whole bunch of cables. And that's kind of it. So like in terms of toys, there's just like a small number of toys, but the vast majority of it is like just a slurry of different cables. And the concept was, so I've discovered that traveling in general is a lot easier if your carry-on or your backpack, instead of having a giant rat's nest of cables at the bottom, which is always a nightmare to dig through, is you have like these little, there's a company called Maxpedition that makes like these tactical, like thick nylon zipped little pouches. And so I have a bunch of these little pouches and each one has different stuff in them. I have one is a bathroom kit. One is all my cables. Another one is like, just like certain types of hacker equipment that like, and so depending on where I'm going and what I'm doing, I can just grab these things off of my travel shelf and throw them in a bag instead of having to like lift a rat's nest of cables out of one backpack and put it in another. And so because my company is tiny and we don't have like a sales or marketing department, the way that we tell the world we exist is me going on stage and presenting. And so for a while before the plague, I was traveling once every month and a half, once every 2 months. And so depending on the length of the trip, I have different sized bags. And so there's this like prep that I do before I travel of like what stuff goes into what bag. And the interesting ones have that little badge on them. And the badge actually came from a BoJack Horseman episode where he had like a duffel bag of the same. And I was like, that's clever. And at the time I had a friend who had an embroidery machine and could make custom patches. We were laughing about it online. And like a few months later at a conference, this guy shows up and goes, here, and hands me these patches that say that. And so I just stuck them on my like, how can I give the TSA the best flavor of heart attack? And so I found like the rat's nest of cables that used to be at the bottom of my backpack that I just stuffed into this little pouch. I put that label on it. And so that if they decide to pull me into secondary inspection because they see this rat's nest of cables, they pull out that thing and they look at it and there's this immediate, like, you can see their face. They go, And then it was really funny is occasionally I'll travel with this thing, which is my Hack the Pentagon challenge coin I got for, I did the, this is like one actual official challenge coin I actually have. Or some NSA stickers or something like that. So you put that in the spy stuff pouch. And if you get pulled over for secondary and they delay you, you get a little bit of a show as the person rooting through your stuff changes color in their face as they realize, oh God, I may be actually like, it's all BS. Obviously, I'm not a government agent, but like, they don't know.
They have this is happening moment. Yeah. This is real. This is what I've been trained for.
Sure. Yeah. And what I've noticed lately is after, as the years progress, like they seem less and less impressed by this stuff and more impressed by the fact that I took a leftover burrito in tinfoil and put that in my backpack. That got me pulled into secondary. Like, and it was really funny. Like they had no idea what a burrito looked like on X-ray. And so it was like a big hubbub. But yeah, so the whole story of the little badges is that the pouches come with like the soft side of Velcro on them because they're intended to have American flags or whatever tactical nonsense people in shooter glasses will put on those pouches. And so I wanted to put something a little more interesting on them. And so I did a custom thing. It was just literally a silly nothing joke that like I honestly forget is there until I pull the thing out and people are like, what? So it's fun.
I think we need a whole series of stories with this, and especially, gadgets that you've procured or acquired or created over the years. But one I wanted to ask you about, now, this is an audio podcast. Apologies that I'm going to do this thing, but I have to. Behind you, I see the dumpster fire cartoon, which I love, or I think I do, yep. But then below that, there's this sort of like light board, which my initial thought was that it was actually a calendar, but
it is.
What? It is?
Mm-hmm.
So I can see 12 columns, and then I'm assuming up to 31 rows. And but I can't quite wrap my head around the lights that are on or off. I see it's connected to something. Is there anything more to this, or is it just a calendar that looks cool?
Both.
Okay.
So this thing up here, Did either of you watch Invader Zim 100 trillion years ago? Okay, so this is Zim and Gur in a dumpster on fire.
In the dumpster fire. Okay, got it.
Yep.
Was it the precursor to the Everything is Fine dumpster fire cartoon, or is this post that?
No, this is much more recent. Okay. So the This Is Fine dog came from a comic artist named Casey Green. Everyone has seen it. It's permeated the internet at this point. But this was drawn by Ricky Simons, who is the voice of Gur from the show.
And cool.
He was pretty active on Twitter for a very long time. And I think he has an Etsy, and I'm pretty sure he has a Patreon as well. And for a while, I can't remember why, he was trying to raise money. I don't remember whether it was just for himself or some cause, but like he was selling art. And I was like, that's pretty cool. And so I have a signed Ricky Simons original, like Zim and Gur in a dumpster fire, always on camera behind me.
I love it.
Yeah, and this calendar is Simone Yetch's. I can't remember what you called it, but this is like, you know who Simone Yetch is?
Unfortunately, no. Sorry.
No.
She was like, I can't swear, can I? Is it gonna get bleeped? She was formerly the queen of shitty robots.
Oh yes, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, well, of course I know her. Yeah, I know her as that. I know her as the queen of shitty robots. Yeah.
Yes. So she built the toothbrush machine and the machine that slaps her in the face and like the hot dog and like she built all this stuff. And she built herself a brand. And then as soon as she started getting like legit interest from huge companies, she slowed down on the robot building and started building other projects. And as that progressed, her popularity continued to increase. And I can't remember why she made it, but she made this calendar. And it was for her to track something. And I don't recall what it was, but it was like so popular that people demanded that it become mass manufactured. And so she opened basically a store to sell these things. And this is one of the original Kickstarter, like first ones, that came out. It was like the first or second wave or something like that. And so basically it's just a calendar. It lets you tap a day and the day will light up. And you can track whatever you want to track. I'm tracking, this is my workout. I'm tired of being pear-shaped. So this is my workout calendar.
So are the lit up days, the days that you worked out?
Yes. So I started in December, which is the very far. This one? Yeah. So in December, this was last December. And then in January, I did absolutely every single day in January. And then in February, there's a huge piece missing because I was traveling most of February.
Yeah, you're at BlueHat. I think we're responsible for a couple of those unlit lights.
Yeah. But yeah, and so that's what I'm using that for. And then you can't really see it, it's off camera, but like next to it, there's that thing. And that is because I'm lucky enough to have a friend that works in the film industry. And she is like a set painter. She does like, she helps build the sets of different shows and movies. And when I met her, she was working on The Expanse. And
I love that show and the book series. I love the book series.
And so all of that stuff on that board are like placards and stickers and stuff from the set of The Expanse. I think the 3rd or 4th season or something like that, where they were left over. And so like they would have these custom stickers printed for like crates and stuff in the background as actors were doing their thing. This was all just silly background nonsense to make the set look more authentic. There was a mountain of it. And so she sent it to me. That was fun.
That's really cool that you framed it. But I know we could probably talk to you for 40 hours if we needed to. But based on time, I'm going to have one last question for you. And that question is kind of ties into how I was saying you have tons of knowledge. You're really patient and great with explaining things for folks like myself that didn't understand various concepts. Is there somewhere where folks that are listening to this podcast could reach out to you if they had questions or just wanted to, ask more about your talk from BlueHat, or if you're comfortable sharing how they can reach out? That'd be great.
So I used to spend quite a lot of time on Twitter, but I don't anymore for obvious reasons. I'm now on Mastodon. I'm same handle, Viss, but I'm on mastodon.social. So mastodon.social /@Viss is me. You can email me, dan@phobos.io. But that's largely where I am at this point. If you find my Twitter profile, it's the same handle, Viss, VISS on Twitter. But it just basically I stopped posting and it just links back to my Mastodon account. So I'm on there and I'm on a handful of other little social network places. But I'm generally pretty easy to track down. And I'm happy to have discussions about interesting stuff with lots of strangers, because that's kind of what I do most of the day anyway. I've fallen squarely into the home automation rabbit hole. And so I've plugged way more stuff into Home Assistant than I probably reasonably should have. And so I'm happy to talk people's ear off about that, in addition to security. But yeah, I'm around. I continue to be around. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
Wonderful. And before we end, what's next for you? Where can folks find you? Are you speaking at any upcoming events or anything coming up that you can think of that's notable that you would like to share?
Yeah, I made the CFP for a conference called Security Fest in Gothenburg, Sweden in May. Sorry, end of May. I'll be in Gothenburg, Sweden presenting at Security Fest. There's a handful of other conferences that I'm waiting for them to open up their CFP, or the details aren't solidified yet, but that's the next known good one that I'm aware of. And that's May. Beyond May, I can't see yet, because the conferences tend to only release their CFPs and their dates and stuff like 3 months before they happen. And so there might be a few more quarter 3, quarter 4, but for now, just Security Fest in Gothenburg. And if I'm lucky, you'll have me back here.
Yes. I would suggest folks just monitor Dan or Viss's Mastodon account, because I'm sure that's where you can find updated information on where to see him at following conferences. But thank you so much, Dan, for coming and speaking on the BlueHat podcast. Had a great time, and we want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for the BlueHat Podcast.
If you have feedback, topic requests, or questions about this episode,
please email us at bluehat@microsoft.com or message us on Twitter at MSFTBlueHat.
Be sure to subscribe for more conversations and insights from security researchers and responders across the industry
by visiting bluehatpodcast.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.